So chapter 10 talks about adaptations to resistance training. The number one adaptations to resistance training are to make it so that you can do better resistance training. The other type of training would be aerobic training. So endurance training, really. They're using like these. Now you could do high intensity interval training, but they're really talking about the difference between resistance training and aerobic training. Now with resistance training, the adaptations are all going to be to the neuromuscular system. So remember, they're connected. It's the neuromuscular system. So some of the changes are going to be to the brain, and some of the changes are going to be to the body or to the muscles. Now, at first, what happens is the neurological changes, the synchronization of the muscle, the firing of the motor units, and then if your body still has enough resources and it still needs the increased strength, then what'll happen is it'll increase the synthesization of actin and myosin, and then your muscles will get bigger. So these are typically the adaptations to resistance training. Next chapter, we'll talk about the adaptations to aerobic training, and that'll all be adaptations to promote the utilization of oxygen. If you're doing resistance training, especially at a particular intensity, we're assuming that your actin and myosin at some point, because of your intensity, is going to start to get broken down and destroyed. And if that's the case, you're going to need to have testosterone, which is going to start to build up these actin and myosin filaments and result in hypertrophy. But if the intensity isn't high enough and these muscles aren't breaking down, there's not going to be such a need for neuromuscular adaptation. So the body will consider aerobic training, and then it will increase capillarization, blood flow, whatever it takes to use oxygen better for activity. The chapter talks about resistance training and the mechanisms by which muscle strength gain occurs. We talked about the neurological changes, the neurological mechanisms, and we also talked about the mechanisms at the muscle fiber level. And we also have to have a little bit of a discussion between resistance training and diet. Now, if you don't have enough calories, then your body is not going to have enough resources or natural resources. Like if you don't have lumber, you can't build a house, right? So if you don't have the caloric intake, it's going to be very difficult to build muscle. So building muscle requires calories. For the most part, we're at about 2,000 calories a day just to make sure that we can perform our activities of daily living and get our basal metabolic rate requirements in. And 2,000 calories a day is pretty low for most individuals, to be honest. So for an individual who's doing resistance training, they're going to have to be a little bit above that, 2,500 calories a day. The 2,000 calories are going to take care of your activities of daily living and basal metabolic rate, and then you have extra calories here for your exercise and any muscle building. But if you're not getting the calories that you need for your activities of daily living and your muscle building, then you're not going to build muscle. What's going to happen is you're going to use your muscle for more fuel, and you're going to end up destroying the gains that you're trying to make with resistance training. And then the last part of the chapter is, should you do resistance training for elderly individuals, for postmenopausal individuals, for women who are pregnant, and for younger individuals? And I focus on the younger population. Regarding younger adolescent athletes doing resistance training, 85% of the injuries come because of lack of supervision. And there is research that suggests that there is improvement in sport performance. So as long as I can mitigate this 85% of the injuries by making sure that things are supervised, then it seems as though that doing resistance training for adolescents is a reasonably, I don't want to say good idea, but it's reasonable, it's valid, as long as I don't let them, drop weights on their feet. And so most of the time what I'm doing is working on technique gains, technique improvement technique, and also supervising where the weights are, everything's racked and things like that. But the chapter does talk about resistance training for special populations. Now, one of the last things that I would say on this slide is remember that this basal metabolic rate, or even more appropriately, the resting metabolic rate, is equal to, this should say RMR, is equal to, and we've done this equation a couple of times, 500 plus 22 times your fat-free mass, plus parentheses, 22 times your fat-free mass, which means that if you're trying to increase your resting metabolic rate, you have to increase, that should be a multiplication sign, your fat-free mass, and fat-free mass is muscle mass. So we don't want to do endurance training necessarily to manage weight, because the resting metabolic rate, or the amount of energy that I'm spending, is directly related to the amount of muscle mass that I have. So we want to do resistance training for not only elderly populations or this or that, but individuals who are worried about type 2 diabetes or obesity or weight management. And resistance training works. That's why we do it. That's why it's included in most athletic training programs. And because of its ability to improve muscle strength and your ability to maintain your activities of daily living, such as bed transfers, getting up and down from chairs, walking, dressing, it's not only important for overall athletic training programs, but the overall fitness of individuals in our population, especially our elderly and growing population. So a lifetime of resistance training is important at making sure that people maintain overall fitness levels. Here's something that I failed to mention back in the day. There's a law that has to do with bone called Wolff's Law. I think it's WOLFE. Could be two F's, I can't remember, but it doesn't matter. That says increased forces on bone, increased force is going to result in, I would say, growth, bone growth, density. The bone will become stronger if it's used. All right, not necessarily growth like height growth, but growth and the increased density of the material itself. This is important because not only does it say that resistance training is important for neuromuscular changes, but changes of the brain and the muscle, but it's also critical for the health and wellness of the bone, right? If I exercise, which increases the force on the bone, then the bone is going to grow and respond to that. And the way the bone would grow and respond to that is to become more dense. So individuals, especially females who are worried about going through menopause, the goal is to maintain a lifetime of resistance training to maintain those the strength and the muscles needed to perform your activities of daily living, and also to maintain bone integrity throughout the course of a lifetime, so that the mineral content or the density of the bone doesn't drop and result in osteoporosis as the individual gets older. So not only is it critical for athletic training, but it's critical for the overall fitness and health, overall health of the body itself. Now, with resistance training, the gains or the changes in muscular fitness are pretty quick. Notice about a 25% improvement in strength gain relatively quickly. A lot of these increases in resistance training strength are because they're more effective at producing the force. That means their technique is improving. So in this first 3 to 6 months, a lot of this gain here is due to technique improvement. not necessarily the change of the neuromuscular system. Also, there's going to be changes in males that are potentially greater than gains that females, only because of just body size. With resistance training, there's hypertrophy or increase in muscle size, which is going to result in increase in muscle strength. But not only is the muscle changing, the brain is also adapting. Here's a couple of different examples of the improvement in strength. You'll see that males and females are able to improve at the same, I guess, slope, which is the same rate, but the maximum ability for males and females is different because of the size of limbs and size of musculature. But in any event, this is a snatch exercise. This is a clean and jerk. And this is a total weight lifted. And you can see that with resistance training, there is significant increase for males and females in terms of the overall amount of muscle that can be lifted. Now, this is where we start talking about the brain changing as well. Mechanisms of strength gain. Well, a couple of the mechanisms are based on the, like this says, the changes at the muscular level, but there are also changes at the neural level. And because this book is a very top-down driven book, it starts with the changes at the neural level. So the motor recruitment, the frequency of which the action potentials are sent, they're going to become more synchronized, which is what we were talking about. How are they becoming more synchronized? What synchronizes them? Is it a part of the brain? Is it only the basal ganglia? Is it the frontal lobe? Is it the muscles? The muscle spindles? Normally, our motor units are not as synchronized as they could be. So through training and progression and practice, what happens is your muscles fire, or your muscles work in better timing with your brain. That's going to make better contractions, more forceful contractions. And what resistance training does is it starts to establish better motor unit recruitment. Now, it could be the case that the brain is firing more effectively. It's increasing the neural drive, increasing the signal sent from the brain. It's increasing the brain's ability to come up with a new signal and another signal fast enough so that your muscles can actually receive a high enough voltage to create a good contraction, as opposed to a graded action potential or a tremor. And with strength, there's also changes in the way that the inhibitory muscle would function. So if I'm trying to do a bicep curl and my tricep is functioning or firing, well, that's going to make it difficult for me to continue the bicep curl. So with strength gain, there's a potential reduction in the neurological impulses to the inhibitory muscles. All of these are neurological mechanisms that are affecting the motor unit recruitment. But for the most part, there's a combination of motor unit synchronization and recruitment that is resulting in strength gain. So a lot of this initial change is all based on the neurological changes. All right. Now, let's see where we're at. So this autogenic inhibition, this automatic generation or creation of muscles being inhibited. This is like we were talking about with the bicep curl. You have a tricep that is going to reduce its contraction. Or you could think that if my Golgi tendon organs are in the tendons of my bicep here, let's draw this out. And we'll be done after this slide. All right, this is my bicep muscle. Remember, the Golgi tendon organs are, let's just make a G for a Golgi tendon organ in your tendon. If your tendon is, if you're lifting a good amount of weight, and your tendon is experiencing a good amount of force and it's elongating, remember the Golgi tendon organ is going to make it so if it's elongated, that the muscle it's attached to is going to relax. And if the muscle relaxes, it relieves the tension from the tendon. But if the muscle is relaxed, then it can't be lifting. So if I'm lifting heavier and heavier weight, the tendency is for the Golgi tendon organ to shut off the bicep. That's the normal inhibitory mechanism caused by the Golgi tendon organs. It's supposed to inhibit the muscle contraction if I'm lifting too much weight. That's supposed to prevent my bicep from tearing or my bones from experiencing too much force. But with training, you can quiet down that response from the Golgi tendon organ so the muscle can generate more force for a longer period of time. Well, I don't know if you've ever like kind of heard of people being able to like lift a car or whatever, but they say that this is one mechanism that contributes to that, to those particular possibilities. And then, so this is the quieting down or the reduction of these impulses. And then let's clear this and go one more slide. And then this is the last slide that talks about the neurological changes. Right, so normally when I do a bicep curl, my tricep is going to fire eccentrically in order to slow my bicep curl down. So if I'm doing a bicep curl, and here's my bone here, and here's another bone, and I'll make this muscle here this color, and this is my bicep here, attaches to my forearm, and then my tricep. Let's go like this. My tricep's going to be up here. Now, if my bicep is firing concentrically, and that's going to result in my arm moving in this direction in a bicep curl, what slows that down? Like if nothing was slowing that down, then my arm would go into complete flexion and it would actually like probably get jammed up against my joint. And if nothing is stopping that from happening, then it's going to continue flexing. What fires to stop that is my tricep fires eccentrically. And my tricep is going to pull my arm into extension like this. My tricep is the brake of my muscle, my bicep curl. So normally, those particular muscles, the agonist and antagonist muscles, they oppose each other. So what the brain does is it quiets down the tricep so that the bicep can continue to contract in that direction. All of this is implying that this link between the neurons and the muscles, that it's morphing, that it's not static, that there's plasticity to it. And what resistance training is doing is not only is it tapping into, that we'll talk about, or you guys will take a look at, not only will it take a look at the changes at the muscle level, but these changes here at the neurological level are factoring into resistance training. That's why, remember, if you take a look at my periodization chart, it's broken down into 6-week cycles, and each of those 6 weeks are combined into 2 12-week mesocycles. And those 12-week mesocycles are long enough for my neurological factors to have taken into effect, and to make it so that the only other option for the body, for my athletes, after about 8 to 10 weeks is to start to put on muscle. And then what happens is we can start to make muscle bigger and grow. All right. So what I'll do is I'll finish up this stuff on this coming Monday, and go into the aerobic changes, same thing. But again, the aerobic changes are going to be more to increase the ability to utilize oxygen. So you'll see that with hypertrophy, there's going to be increases in the actual, this is myofibrils, this is muscle fibers. This is not necessarily the case. So the mechanisms for making your muscles bigger could be that you grow more muscle fibers. That is not the case. Usually individuals are born with the same percentage or number of muscle fibers that they had when they die, and the same percentage of type 1 and type 2 muscle fiber types. What happens though is, rather than more muscle fibers, within that muscle fiber, there's more and more actin and myosin filaments. So like a tree doesn't have more than one trunk, usually. Usually it'll have one trunk, but when it grows, it doesn't grow another trunk and then another trunk and then 500 trunks. It just grows a little bit more xylem around that trunk, and then the same thing. And then you get the rings of a tree. And this is the mechanism by which your muscles are going to increase their muscle size, not by adding more muscle fibers, but by adding more myosin and actin filaments. And all of the other things, increased sarcoplasm, increased oxygen, one second, I'm actin myosin filaments. Yeah, so it's mostly, now hypertrophy is based on muscle strength and power. So the enzymes that break down ATP, those will improve. The rate of ATP production will improve. So the rate of phosphorylation will improve. So anything that's designed to increase the ability for the muscles to lift and to do things powerfully are the major changes that are going to happen with resistance training. But we'll finish up with that on Monday. So I'm going to stop the share. I'm going to stop the